Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome back, everyone. This month, we wanted to take some time and talk about an exciting technology. Here over the last, decade or so, we've really been talking about drones and where they're going to fit in agriculture. And I think we're really starting to see this technology find its niche in the industry. Originally, we talked about imagery, but as the capability has come along for us to make applications with these drones, I think there's been a lot more excitement and a lot more movement in that space. So to talk about that development today, we've got Dr. John Fulton. He's an ag engineer with Ohio State, and then we have one of his master's students, Alex Thomas. So could you guys introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. First, my name's John Fulton. I'm a faculty member in the Food, Ag, and Biological Engineering Department and do some teaching, a little bit of research, and a lot of extension, it seems like. So that's I got a 3-way appointment. Mainly focus on digital/precision ag. So that really means automation, some sensor development, and then looking at new technologies that fit in to help our Ohio farmers.
All right, and my name is Alex Thomas. I'm a grad student for Dr. Fulton in the Food, Ag, and Biological Engineering Department. Been doing a lot of work with using drones for spreading cover crops and doing a lot of research with that.
Well, thanks for joining us. I'm interested to hear what you guys have been doing in this area. But first, why don't you catch us up to speed on kind of the changes that have been happening in the industry in the last couple of years, because some of the work we're going to talk about really wasn't even on the scene just a few years ago.
As Elizabeth alluded to, when we saw drones really kind of just explode here about 10 years ago, we were mainly thinking about using them for like scouting, using cameras and taking pictures, videos, etc. That's really where they got the first flush of uses in agriculture. But here more recently, I'd say in the last 5-6 years, all of a sudden we saw spray drones that were fairly economical kind of come out. And then within just a few years, all of a sudden, a couple companies not only allowed you to have a tank and a boom, but you could pop the tank off and put a spreader on. And so all of a sudden you could start talking about basically applying anything granular, whether that's a cover crop, seed, potentially fertilizer. And that's kind of where we've seen here in Ohio the recent growth is doing some spreading plus spraying. The big things I think that's happened in the last probably 4 years in this is, number one is the utility of these being used. They can cover quite a few acres, especially in the spraying realm, and do a pretty good job of delivering product out there, but they're getting bigger. They just continue to get bigger. So if you go back a few years, we were probably talking anywhere from 5 gallons to 8 gallons kind of max. Today it's like you got to at least be 10 to 12 gallons on a tank and a payload of 50 plus pounds today. So they continue to get bigger. And just to kind of give everyone a glimpse, we're looking at just got an FAA approval for an 80-gallon drone as well. So I just see them increasing their capacity. Obviously, that increases the size. That increases the batteries. Right now, all the ones that at least on the market are all battery operated. And so we've seen a lot of advances in batteries in particular. But I would say the two things that kind of come to mind is the size of them continues to increase kind of annually, and then ability to do both spraying and spreading with the same drone. It's not that much.
Yeah, I think it's really wild over the last few years. Put a plug in. One of the places you can come and see a lot of this technology all in one place is Farm Science Review. And it seems like every year we come to that show and there's a new drone that's twice as big as the one we saw last year with twice as many capabilities. The technology has just really exploded. So if you're listening and you're thinking you want to go out and buy one today, we do want to caution you a little bit. There are a few things you have to take care of in order to get one of these things off the ground legally. Could you guys go into some details about what someone who's interested would have to look into?
First, for any kind of drone, you're going to need your Part 107. That's for any commercial use of a drone. You're going to have that. And then for these spray and spread drones, you're going to have your Part 137. And that's what your typical crop duster has, but you're going to have that because you're either spraying a chemical from the air or spreading something that propagates life, your cover crop seed or whatnot. So you have to have that Part 137. That's very basic. then you're going to need to have all your applicator license through ODA, insurance, and those other things.
So very simply, the 107 basically allows you to be a pilot. Think of it that way. And then the 137 provides you being an aerial applicator, just like the crop duster. Both of those are fairly attainable today. Obviously, anyone can go out and get their 107 to become a pilot. That costs about $150, and you sit down and take a test. And then the 137 requires a little bit of paperwork, and you basically submit that. I'll say the nice thing is that we've kind of, we continue to see this mature, but when you either purchase a drone or maybe even working with a company, now there's enough companies out there that will help you in this realm of getting the right certificates and things in line for you to do what you're trying to do. And so I think that's one of the other things that we've seen over the last few years. It used to be kind of like, well, there wasn't a lot of resources out there to kind of help out. But today, if I'm interested in purchasing a drone, obviously I need to go get my 107. That's kind of, you can do online courses for that to get prepped for it. And a lot of times they'll have things for your 137, your 138, things like that you may need otherwise to do some of the spraying and spreading.
And if you're not interested in flying on your own, I think we've really seen the number of folks who are offering this as a service locally really grow in the last few year really. I know I've been answering questions of folks on how to get legal. So there's folks who are offering this as a service. If you don't want to fly, you don't want to take the test, but you want to try it out on your farm, I think all you have to do anymore is check your local Facebook page, and you'll probably find several people who can help you out.
Yeah, I don't know of really a place or area in Ohio that's not covered by some kind of services today. And they continue to pop up, which gives me an indication here in Ohio that there's still a need. There's enough work out there to get a little company up and going and provide drone application services.
Let's get into some of the projects you've been working on. Alex, you've really taken the lead with this cover crop research and have done a few different application methods within there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing?
Yeah, so we started out just doing pattern tests with your seed and testing it under different settings. So you have to calibrate for the seed, and it's all automatic on the drone that we've been using. And then you have to set your rate, your altitude, your flight speed, and your spinner disc speed, and then your route spacing. You set all that, and then it uploads to the drone, and after that's an autonomous operation pretty much. You just gotta watch for obstacles and everything else. So yeah, we started out with pattern tests. We tested with Sierra Rye, crimson clover, and radish seeds. We did them by themselves, and then we mixed them together and did some pattern tests. And then after we pattern tested, we separated the two seeds in the mix to try to determine, is it spreading the same when it's mixed together or when it's by itself. So we saw sometimes it can, when we mix the Sierra Rye with the crimson clover, improve the flow. So it spread a little bit further on the crimson clover. Sierra Rye is still limited to about an 18-foot route spacing to keep your variation below 20%, and that's what's considered acceptable for spraying operations. You might be limited by one of those seeds, so that's kind of what we saw. We've done that. We did spinner disc speed testing with Sierra Rye to see how that would affect it. So we saw on that single spinner disc on some of those spreaders, it's causing a leftward skewness, especially at lower speeds. It increases it to like a 70-30% split on left-to-right rate. So that's what we saw at the 550 RPMs. And then as you got higher, that skewness reduced. That really improved how wide you could increase your route spacing. So that was pretty interesting to see and important, so you maintain a uniform application. So after we did all that, this past year, we went out and spread Sierra Rye into soybeans on 30 and 15-inch rows and corn at 3 different canopy conditions. So we spread it green canopy when it was about 50% dry or 50% desiccated, and then at almost harvest ready, kind of see how the canopy would affect your deposition to the ground. So the biggest thing we took out of that is on the soybeans, when you're spreading in the green canopy, it created a funneling effect. So it really increased your rate that was going in between the rows. When you compared that to any of the corn applications or when the beans were 50% dry to harvest ready. So that was one of the biggest factors that we saw canopy had.
So you saw it coming up more in rows rather than an even distribution.
Correct. So this year we didn't really get to see it visibly. The emergence was kind of bad due to the drought conditions, but just from our collection pans, you're able to see we had like a 10 kilogram per hectare difference in the green canopy applications versus the dried. So
Did you see much seed catching in the corn?
yes, so we really saw it high at the green canopy stage. We could see up to 4 to 5 seeds in the collar, and then as you looked on the leaves, you would see some on the leaves. It reduced, and we didn't see it visually as much as the corn dried down, but statistically we didn't see any results from that.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to go out to the field with Alex, and he works really hard putting out those pans and collecting all this data. Could you give us what some of the big takeaways are that you see that you're going to start recommending to folks based off of what you've learned?
Yes, the big takeaway is farmers going to be able to start using this adopt cover crop more availably on their farm, not having to have a plan come out, and if your field's too small or has surrounded by trees and you can't have an aerial application done and you can't get a ground rig out there, that's kind of one of the big things we're going to see with drones and increasing cover crop adoption. And then making sure you do your pattern test before you get out there to make sure you're spreading it uniformly. That's going to be a big key so you have uniform growth.
Yeah, I mean, really tweaking those settings. And you tried this with a couple different drones too, right?
So I put out some randomized pans for a couple different drones. So I've done testing with some custom applicators with a T30 and the XAG P100 Pro. And those are two of three of the biggest companies right now in drones. And so far we've seen year variation is going to be in that like 18 to 25% most of the time. With XAG, we saw a little bit more variation across the field, but those pans, we randomly placed them so we didn't know where in the spread width where that pan was placed. But when we placed those pans in a row, we saw about 19 to 20% variation. So we've done a little bit of testing with a couple of drones.
So would you say that depending on what kind of drone you have, your setup is going to be a little bit different?
Yes. So right now, we've got spinner disc style, and the XAGs come with two vertical spinning discs that create a flat fan pattern with the seed instead of just a broadcast distribution. So yeah, you're definitely going to have different results with that.
But in general, on the spreaders themselves, I would characterize the majority of them today are a tank or a bin that's of decent size, depending on the size of the drone, and a single disc at the bottom of it. That's generally speaking all of them except the ZAG or XAG, which is another Chinese company that's selling quite a bit. That design that they're providing is way different with the dual kind of vertical disc that they're doing. So, but the majority of them are a single disc. But I would say that, it's like everything, things are improving. So I would say that you hear it saying, well, it's 18% variability, 25%, but the design of discs are changing. So I'm saying they're making improvements to overcome some of these challenges.
Yep, the XAG, we're seeing those. They've got a dual auger system right now for metering the material, and that might do a little bit better job of providing a uniform rate versus the hopper disc on some of the other drones. But some stuff showing that a new DJI might be coming out with that auger system too for the metering. So it's always improving.
So one of the biggest challenges I hear farmers saying is why they don't do cover crops is timing, as far as being able to get in the field in a timely manner and see some good emergence with that cover crop. You mentioned airplanes, and they can have good emergence sometimes if we have a dry year or timing wise, not always a good stand. So it sounds like through this, it can really widen the window if you have your own drone. Do you know what that looks like if you're hiring a company to do the application, how available they are? Have you talked with them very much to see the flexibility there?
There's kind of a couple things I think in there, Amanda. So obviously if you own your own drone for your farm, then you can manage the timing of application, and we can maybe come back to that a little bit if we want to. From the company standpoint, generally speaking, you got to be signed up well in advance. You got to be working with the companies and saying, hey, I've got X amount of fields, so many acres that are going to be applied, and get on their list. And the ones, at least we've been around, have been pretty good. I mean, they can tell you within, I can be here this week or next week, and they're going to be there.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, barring a major storm or something. But they're pretty good about timing wise, and so as long as you got a good communication, what's your fields, how many acres, they can get you worked in, and obviously you got to kind of negotiate. You got to have your seed ready, that kind of stuff. So as long as you got all that in, I think within a week, if not a few days, they've been pretty consistent on having the birds there to fly and spread it.
And then, did you want to say more about kind of the timing and crop flexibility?
Yeah, well, the nice thing, or at least I think, obviously there's advantages to all three: the ground machine, your traditional aero applicator, and then the drones. There's advantages and challenges to all of them. But I would say if we're just talking drones, one of the things that I see is again, it depends on how the season kind of evolves and but we've been out, by mid second, third week of August plant cover crops. I mean, if the timing was right and we were out, we've spread at least on our end clear almost through the end of October. So you can get out there, you can be out there prior to the rain. I mean, you can even start timing up like that. Like, we had a drought last year, but we had some rain that came through. So if you're working, whether you have your own or someone else, you could do a little bit of timing around getting that first rain, because that's as critical as anything to get that emerged and out of the ground. Then, or it could rain and I get a couple of days. If we get enough rain, you can be out that day or the next day applying. So there's some things that the drones can do, maybe a ground machine, or if you're waiting on an aero machine, they can't do, but they can be very timely and it really open. I think you mentioned this earlier, really open that application window up in the fall to get those things out in a standing crop, get them hopefully emerged if we get a rain, or a few rains. You get your harvest off and you got good biomass already developing before frost.
Yeah, I think it's a great advantage for people who are just getting into cover crops, because usually when we're talking about that, it's like cereal rye is great because you can establish it late into the year and it grows really well, but then you do have to manage it in the spring, where it may be more comfortable for some folks to go with a winter kill species, but you have to have those out in early August sometimes. So maybe this can open that window for some people who want to try some of those winter kill species but haven't been able to get them planted in time yet.
Absolutely. I think that's the advantage here potentially is being able to do something that I haven't been able to do.
So we do have some trials in e-fields this year.
So we had so if folks are interested, obviously they can get online and look at the 2023 and 2024 reports. In particular, our reports, the 2024 report has at least 3 studies just on cover crops. And then obviously, hopefully in eBarns we'll have some that deal with pasture seeding, which is very similar. But folks that are interested in learning a little bit more about what we did, the 2023 and 2024 reports have information in it.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to talk about pasture seeding, but I know you've been working on that too. Any quick teasers you want to share about that?
One advantage is when those cows have been out there all winter feeding, you can get in there with a drone and not have issues getting stuck on your four-wheeler, whatever equipment you're out there spreading with. So yeah, we've been doing some frost seeding, and it does good. You might have to have a little bit more user input on the autonomous side when you're applying on those steep hills. We did some applications out at Eastern Research Station. There's some pretty rough terrain, but they did a really good job.
Right. So besides eFields, are there any resources you'd like to share with our listeners if they're interested in learning more?
For those that are interested in potentially thinking about getting a drone, I would encourage everyone to read the FAA website for drones, or UAS, has got all the information you need to talk about in terms of getting the 107, 137, etc. All those resources there. So that's a great place to start. Where can I take the test? Those kinds of things can be all found there. And the second thing I would say for those that are interested in getting into this, there's plenty of resources online to go and study for your 107 in particular. And I encourage folks, because a lot of that test does deal with being a pilot, and so reading a map and things of that nature. Most of us, this is a lot different when you're reading an aeronautical map versus a map we're thinking about in our vehicle. So I would encourage folks. The DigitalAg website, we have a little bit of information on there that talks about some of these technologies, in particular drones. But the other resources, reach out. I think the thing about this whole deal about drones is it changes almost weekly, definitely annually. It's been hard to keep up with all the new technologies and what's changing, and and hey, how do I best use this? Those kinds of things. So a lot of times we can't even keep up, but normally we're talking to people and kind of, and so I tell people just to reach out with questions.
Throw this one at you as we're almost out of time. Do you see any impacts with tariffs and relationship with China? Because a lot of these drones are coming from China. Have you seen any impact yet, or is there talk of potential impact?
Absolutely. I would assume, if you hadn't heard, but there's been a lot of talk over the last year about DJI. Mm-hmm. And, at one point, the feds were saying, we're just going to ban them totally, which they did put a bill through that got a lot of interest, but it didn't pass ultimately in the Senate. But I will tell you this, they're still looking at it. And so how's that impacting us? Well, I would say in terms of imports right now, getting some of these drones have been a challenge. I think there's still some volume there that if people are trying to buy, they probably can find them. But I will tell you, it's not as easy inflow on some of these Chinese drones into the country. So it's just not like, hey, I need a T-40 today and I'm going to go get it. There may not be an opportunity. So what we're going to see, what I think is going to happen is, I don't think that's going to get cut off. They'll still, they'll kind of come in, but at a slower pace in general, in my mind, for right now. But you're going to see more ramp up of American companies. Okay, for those have been to Farm Science for You, Helio is one company that's building one. They're out of Texas. But if you're keeping up, even south of Columbus here, we're having a company spin up. And they're not going to serve agriculture, they're going to serve other industries. But my point is, I think in the next 2 to 4 years, you're going to see a lot more drone companies that are from the U.S. And so there'll be more options out there in the near future.
Great. Well, thank you guys for your time today. A lot of great information. I think there's more that we could have covered. So maybe a future podcast down the road, if you're willing. Encourage our listeners to check out eFields, the digital ag website. You guys are also on social media to find some of those resources. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Hey, podcast listeners. Just a reminder to give us a like or subscribe so you know when we release new episodes. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to leave us a review also. We appreciate the comments.